So, um, imagine you're sitting down to play a friendly game of Monopoly,
Okay, always a good time.
right? You pick your token, maybe you grab the little metal dog, and you count out your starting cash, and, you look across the board, completely ready to roll.
Sounds fair so far.
Yeah, but there's a major catch.
Yeah.
Your opponent's grandfather actually beat your grandfather at this exact game like 50 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And because of that, your opponent starts today's game with hotels already built on Boardwalk and Park Place. Meanwhile, you're just, hoping to roll a 7 and pass go without immediately going bankrupt.
That is brutal. I mean, it completely reframes what we even call a competition, doesn't it?
Exactly. You are technically playing the same game on the same board, but the reality of the outcome was basically decided half a century before you even sat down at the table.
When the rules of today are dictated by the victories of yesterday, I mean, the whole concept of a fair game just breaks down.
It really does. And welcome to today's Deep Dive, everyone. We are exploring this really fascinating dialogue from our sources today between two thinkers, Nick and Maya, and they are unpacking something they call the dynasty paradox.
It's a great concept.
It is. So our mission for you listening today is to pinpoint the exact moment where the completely natural, deeply human instinct to care for your children crosses an invisible line.
Right. The moment it turns into a permanent concentration of power.
Exactly. Because we want to make it clear, we're just reporting on what Nick and Maya are arguing here. We're not taking sides, but they bring up some wild stuff.
Yeah, the stakes here go far beyond real estate or, trust funds. We are going to look at how this generational advantage infiltrates our culture, hijacks our dopamine pathways, and, this is the crazy part, literally alters the physical structure of a child's brain.
That part completely blew my mind. Because, society loves to celebrate the individual who wins the race, but we rarely look at what happens when the winner gets to rewrite the rules for everyone else's kids.
Right. So to understand how this paradox actually works, we kind of have to look at the illusion of the fair race.
Yeah, because we always talk about life as this pure meritocracy. A foot race where everyone lines up at the starting gun, and whoever's the fastest, hardest-working runner just wins.
Well, the source material uses that exact analogy to dismantle the whole concept. Nick poses this scenario. He says, imagine you organize a perfectly fair race, a true test of speed and endurance.
Okay.
But after one generation, you allow the winner's children to start 10 meters ahead of the pack.
Right.
And then the generation after that, their descendants start 100 meters ahead, give it a century, and they are starting a full kilometer ahead of everyone else before the gun even fires.
A full kilometer. I mean, at that point, you aren't even watching a race. You're watching a predetermined outcome dressed up as a competition.
Exactly.
But, to be fair, the descendants starting a kilometer ahead might actually be genuinely talented runners.
Yeah.
They might have perfect form, they train hard.
Oh, they very well might be exceptional runners, but it stops being a test of speed and becomes a test of placement. And life is obviously infinitely more complicated than a track meet.
Right. It's not just a straight line.
No, not at all. When people think about inheritance, they usually just imagine passing down a house or transferring a bank account. But the sources point out that the transfer of wealth is actually the transfer of all these invisible levers of power.
Wait, what do you mean by levers of power?
I mean, it's an entire ecosystem. You're passing down premium education, elite social connections, political access.
Oh, wow.
And immunity from risk. Think about it. If a runner at the regular starting line trips and falls, they lose the race. If a runner a kilometer ahead trips, they have this massive cushion of resources to catch them, treat them, and just put them right back on the track.
That is a huge advantage.
It is. In some cases, it's passing down control over the very industries that the other runners are hoping to get jobs in. They are absolutely no longer starting where the rest of humanity starts.
But hold on, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because Maya raises a really compelling point in the dialogue, and honestly, it's probably what a lot of you listening are thinking right now.
Sure, let's hear it.
If I work incredibly hard, I take massive risks, I build a business from scratch, and I invent something useful for society, isn't leaving the fruits of my labor to my kids just the ultimate form of taking care of my family?
Yeah, that is the most common pushback.
Right. Like, why shouldn't they benefit from my 80-hour work weeks? Aren't we just punishing success at that point?
It's a really powerful defense because it's tied to our deepest sense of family loyalty. But Nick makes this crucial distinction in his response. He argues there is absolutely no moral issue with caring for your family. No one in this dialogue is saying parents shouldn't provide for their kids.
Okay, so where is the issue then?
The systemic issue arises when that care scales up into a permanent concentration of power.
But where is the line, though? Like, what does that difference actually look like in practice?
According to the sources, it's the difference between making sure your child is fed, educated, and safe versus ensuring your child has so much accumulated leverage that they can dictate the terms of survival for other people's children.
Wow, okay, that's heavy.
Yeah. When the advantage becomes so vast that the descendants are completely insulated from the consequences of their own failures, and everyone else is just excluded from the opportunity of success regardless of their talent, Nick argues you no longer have a meritocracy. You have an aristocracy.
Which brings up a huge question for me. If the economic starting line is this heavily staggered, what is actually happening to the runners themselves? And this is the part of the source material that absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
The neuroscience part.
Yes, the dialogue transitions to this revelation that the starting line isn't just economic. The environment created by this unequal race literally rewires the physical brains of the people running it.
Yeah, we are moving from economic philosophy straight into hard neuroscience here. The sources dive into what environments of scarcity do to a developing brain. And the core mechanism driving this whole change is chronic stress, specifically the role of cortisol.
Now, I know cortisol is the stress hormone, but it's also what wakes us up in the morning, right? Like, it's not inherently a bad thing.
Not at all. Cortisol is incredibly useful, even life-saving, if you are, say, running away from a predator in the wild.
Right.
It floods your system, gives you a massive burst of energy, and heightens your immediate awareness so you can survive the next 10 minutes, but it is biologically designed to be temporary.
Keyword there being temporary.
Exactly. The research cited by Nick and Maya is super clear on this. When a child is born into poverty, they are living in an environment where safety is never guaranteed.
So they are dealing with chronic, everyday stress. It's like stress about food, housing, neighborhood safety, even just absorbing their parents' financial panic.
Precisely. And when a developing brain is constantly flooded with cortisol because the alarm system basically won't shut off, that hormone actually becomes toxic to developing neural circuits.
It's toxic. Wait, really?
Yes. The brain is forced to redirect its energy away from long-term development and pour everything into immediate survival.
The sources mentioned that this chronic stress actually changes the physical shape of the brain. But, I mean, how does that even happen? What is physically changing?
It comes down to how the brain prioritizes its own architecture under a threat. The hippocampus, which is vital for memory formation and learning, can literally shrink.
It shrinks.
It literally shrinks because chronic stress halts the production of new neurons there. And at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, complex reasoning experiences, what they call accelerated neural pruning.
Meaning it develops more slowly?
More slowly and less robustly. But meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hypersensitized. It grows stronger, and it is constantly scanning for danger.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Let me offer an analogy to clarify this for everyone listening. Think of the brain like a computer.
I like that.
If you were born into scarcity, your computer is basically running this massive, continuous background antivirus scan called survival mode.
Yes.
And it takes up so much RAM and processing power just trying to keep the system safe from immediate threats that there is literally zero processing power left to run creative applications or long-term planning software.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. If your amygdala is constantly blaring that you are in danger, you biologically cannot engage the prefrontal cortex to do complex problem solving.
Right, because you're just trying to survive.
Exactly. You can't plan for a career 5 years down the line when your biology is screaming at you to secure your next meal today.
So how can society possibly look at that biological reality, where the stress of poverty is physically altering the runner's lungs and muscles before the starting gun even fires, and call this equal opportunity?
They cannot do it honestly. And the vital takeaway from the neuroscience here is that this is biology acting exactly as it is supposed to.
Right.
It is an adaptation to a hostile environment. It is not a failure of character. It is not a lack of willpower or a poor work ethic. And conversely, a child born into abundance has a brain shaped by security.
Meaning their amygdala is quiet.
Yes, their prefrontal cortex is totally free to explore, create, and plan for the future simply because survival is a given.
So if the biological deck is stacked this heavily against people born into poverty, why isn't there massive societal pushback? I mean, how do people just accept this as normal?
Well, societies are remarkably adept at creating psychological narratives to protect the status quo. To explain how we internalize this, the dialogue brings in a behavioral concept known as the blank slate theory.
I have heard of the blank slate theory, but how are Nick and Maya applying it to wealth and poverty in this context?
In this framework, it means that no child chooses the circumstances of their birth. You don't pick your parents, your ZIP code, or your starting bank account. You arrive as a complete sponge.
Right.
Yet from the moment a child is born, their subconscious mind begins absorbing the values, the expectations, and the structural limitations of their specific environment. And the child just assumes this specific environment is simply the universal truth of how the whole world operates.
So a child raised in immense wealth absorbs unspoken assumptions about what they deserve, what doors will automatically open for them, and what level of risk is acceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
And a child raised in poverty absorbs a completely different set of limitations about what is even possible. Neither child chose this programming, but it just becomes their baseline reality.
And this is exactly where the societal myths take over. Because society doesn't like to admit the race is rigged, it has to invent a reason why some people are a kilometer ahead and others are stuck at the starting line.
Oh, man. Think about the cultural and religious narratives we hear all the time. The sources point out how incredibly often society falsely frames wealth as a sign of divine favor.
Oh, absolutely.
You hear it everywhere. They are blessed, they worked hard, and God rewarded them. And the dark flip side of that equation is that poverty is so often framed as a moral failing, a test of faith, or a sign of divine disfavor.
It is one of our oldest and most destructive narratives. When you equate financial accumulation with moral goodness, you are essentially telling the person at the starting line that they are not just economically poor, they are spiritually or morally deficient.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly devastating for you listening at home.
Yeah.
Even if you consciously know you work hard, say you are working 2 jobs, you're grinding every single day. If the entire world constantly broadcasts the message that success equals character, how much hidden damage does that do to a person's self-worth when they just cannot get ahead?
The psychological toll is immense. The subconscious absorbs those stories, even if the conscious mind fiercely rejects them. When a society tells a biologically stressed brain that its struggle is actually a character flaw, it layers profound psychological trauma directly on top of the neurological disadvantage we talked about earlier.
But Maya pushes back again in the dialogue, making the argument that inequality has always existed. She says, it's just human nature. It's how societies naturally organize themselves.
Right, but Nick introduces a brilliant counter to that, which they call the longevity fallacy.
Meaning, just because something has existed for a long time doesn't make it justified or even natural.
Precisely. I mean, for thousands of years, humans accepted absolute monarchy as the natural order. We accepted feudalism, where peasants were literally tied to the land.
Right.
We accepted slavery. Diseases have existed for as long as humanity has, but we don't argue against curing them just because they have longevity.
That's a great point. If we look at this from the evolutionary perspective that the source outlines, the key to a species' survival is adaptation. A society that punishes a brain for the circumstances of its birth. A society that willfully wastes millions of minds and human potential based entirely on ZIP codes is basically running on an outdated, fragile operating system.
Exactly.
And civilizations collapse if they refuse to update their operating systems to reflect new realities.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question here. What is the engine keeping this outdated operating system running? We have zoomed in on the physical brain and we have looked at the cultural myths we invent.
Right.
Now we need to zoom out and examine the actual mechanism driving this infinite loop of the dynasty paradox.
And that mechanism is money itself. The sources draw this really stark, beautiful contrast between the physics of money and the limits of nature.
Yeah, in the natural world, there are built-in biological limits to accumulation. A lion might be the apex predator of the savanna, but it cannot own every zebra.
Right, that would be impossible.
Exactly. An eagle cannot claim legal ownership of every fish in the river. A giant redwood tree cannot absorb all the sunlight and own the entire forest. Nature naturally disperses resources because biological limits strictly enforce it.
You can only eat so much, occupy so much physical space, or exert so much energy in a single day.
But humanity invented a tool that completely bypasses those biological limits.
The concept of capital.
Yes. Think about human effort. A laborer digging a ditch with a shovel can only sell the literal hours in a day. Even the strongest person on Earth has a strict biological limit of energy.
Obviously.
But money doesn't sleep. Money works 24 hours a day. And more importantly, money as an abstraction of value can buy 1,000 mechanical excavators, acres of land, and the labor of hundreds of other people.
So the person with the shovel can literally never compete with the person who inherited the excavators. The excavators multiply value faster than human muscle ever could.
No.
But that raises an obvious question for me. Why doesn't the person with 1,000 excavators ever look around and say, okay, I've won. I have more than enough to be secure. I'm stopping.
Because of how our brains evolved to measure success. This brings us right back to biology, specifically our dopamine pathways.
Wait, how does dopamine actually drive this?
So in our hunter-gatherer days, our reward system dopamine did not evolve to understand absolute wealth. It evolved to track relative status.
Relative status.
Right. In a tribe of 50 people facing a brutal winter, if you had slightly more food or slightly better shelter than the person next to you, you survived. Your brain rewarded you with dopamine for being one step ahead of your neighbor.
Ah, I see. It never asks, do I have enough calories for a lifetime? It only asks, do I have one more calorie than the guy standing next to me?
Exactly. That ancient hardwired biology was an essential survival mechanism. It is not inherently greed in some cartoonish, villainous sense.
Right, it's just biology.
But consider what happens when you take that ancient wiring, which only knows how to want more than the neighbor, and you plug it into an artificial system like money, which has absolutely no natural starting point.
You create a perpetual engine of accumulation. Let me try an analogy here to pull this all together.
Go for it.
So what does this all mean? If our ancient brain wiring is like a car engine that only knows how to accelerate, and money is a limitless, frictionless highway with no stop signs and no exits, are we just destined to keep driving faster and faster until the wheels completely fall off?
That is the profound, unresolved tension Nick and Maya leave us with. The dialogue clarifies that money itself isn't necessarily the enemy. It is arguably the most useful tool for mass cooperation humanity has ever invented.
Sure.
But whenever a tool gains enough power to shape generations and, as we've seen, to physically alter the cellular brain structures of the next generation, society has a massive obligation to examine it.
So the ultimate question isn't whether money is good or bad. It is whether humanity is still controlling the tool of money, or if the tool has begun to control humanity.
Are we managing the highway, or are we just blindly feeding an ancient dopamine loop at the expense of our entire society's health and potential?
Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by looking at a simple game of Monopoly and the illusion of the staggered foot race. We dove deep into the neuroscience of scarcity, seeing how cortisol literally shrinks the hippocampus and forces the brain to redirect all its energy into immediate survival mode.
Yeah.
We unpacked the blank slate theory and the damaging cultural myths that try to equate wealth with moral goodness. And we ended up staring down the friction between our evolutionary dopamine loops and the limitless nature of money.
It is a phenomenal amount of interconnected systems to process.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to turn this directly to you listening right now. Take a moment to reflect on your own life, your own history. What invisible advantages did you inherit at your starting line? And what unseen disadvantages were handed to you before you even knew you were in a race?
It's an important reflection.
Because deeply understanding your own starting line is the very first step to seeing the board clearly.
And as you reflect on your own starting line, consider this final, somewhat haunting question that builds on the intersection of money and biology we have been unpacking today.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our economic system truly has no natural stopping point, and we know as a scientific fact that environments of extreme wealth and extreme scarcity physically shape the neural architecture of the children born into them,
Yeah.
are we heading toward a future where generational wealth doesn't just create different social classes, but literally drives humanity to evolve into two entirely different biological groups?
A literal biological dynasty. That is a heavy, incredible thought to chew on. Think about that the next time you sit down to play a board game and see those hotels waiting for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.